The third victim they found was Rebecca Chen. Rebecca was 35, living in Hartford with her husband David. She had visited Brennan's clinic in 2006 for what she thought was a routine abortion. She was 22 then, in college, and not ready for a child. Unlike Maya and Keisha, Rebecca had never been told she'd had a hysterectomy. She only discovered it when she and David started trying to conceive in 2015. Her doctor had been confused by her ultrasounds, eventually realizing that her uterus was missing. Rebecca had been as shocked as Maya had been. She had assumed there must be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Her doctor suggested maybe she'd had some kind of emergency surgery she didn't remember, perhaps during her appendectomy as a teenager. Rebecca had accepted that explanation because the alternative, that someone had removed her uterus without her knowledge or consent, seemed impossible. When Sarah contacted her and explained the investigation, Rebecca had broken down crying on the phone. "I thought I was losing my mind. My doctor kept asking me if I was sure I'd never had a hysterectomy, and I kept insisting I hadn't, but the evidence said otherwise. I started doubting my own memory. I went through years of therapy trying to figure out if I had somehow repressed a traumatic surgery." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "You didn't repress anything, Miss Chen. Someone violated you and then covered it up so well that you didn't even know it had happened." Rebecca pulled her medical records from the 2006 abortion procedure. They showed exactly what Sarah expected by now: a routine abortion with no complications noted, no consent for additional procedures, no mention of a hysterectomy. But Rebecca no longer had a uterus. She joined the case immediately, driven by a fury Sarah recognized. It was the same fury Maya had. The fury of someone who had been violated in the most intimate way and then gaslit into questioning their own reality. Over the next several weeks, Sarah and Maya found 17 more women. Each story was heartbreaking in its own way. There was Amber Martinez, who had gone to Brennan for a consultation about birth control options and woke up from what she was told was a routine examination with unexplained abdominal pain that lasted for weeks. She only discovered she'd had a hysterectomy when she went to a different doctor 5 years later. There was Nicole Johnson, who had been told she needed emergency surgery for an ectopic pregnancy and had consented to removal of one fallopian tube, only to discover later that her entire uterus had also been removed. There was Destiny Brown, who had visited the clinic at 19 for a pregnancy test and somehow ended up having surgery she didn't remember consenting to. Her medical records from that visit were almost entirely blank. The pattern was consistent and damning. Young women, predominantly women of color, predominantly low income. Women who came to Brennan's clinic for routine reproductive health care and left with parts of their bodies missing. Women who were either never told what had been done to them, or were told it was a medical emergency that justified the unauthorized surgery. Women who Brennan had calculated wouldn't or couldn't fight back. Sarah sat in her office late one night, looking at the wall of victim photos they had assembled. 23 women so far, and they were still finding more. 23 lives altered, futures stolen, bodies violated. All for research. All so Dr. Richard Brennan could publish papers and get grants and build his reputation. Jennifer came in carrying 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Sarah. "We have enough. We have testimony from 23 victims, testimony from a former nurse, documentation of falsified records, evidence of a research pipeline that required more tissue than could be ethically obtained. It's time to confront him directly." Sarah took the coffee gratefully. "He's going to lawyer up immediately." Jennifer smiled grimly. "Let him. We're not making an arrest yet. We're conducting an interview. And sometimes, even guilty people can't resist trying to defend themselves. Sometimes they say things their lawyers wish they hadn't." The next day, Sarah and Jennifer drove to Meridian Biotechnology Research Facility, a gleaming modern building in a corporate park about 50 miles from where Brennan's clinic had been. The lobby was all glass and steel, with photos on the walls showcasing cutting-edge research and smiling scientists. Dr. Brennan's office was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a quiet hallway. His name was on the door in tasteful lettering: Richard Brennan, MD, PhD, Senior Research Consultant. Sarah knocked, and a moment later, the door opened. Dr. Brennan was 67 years old now, but he had aged well. He was tall and distinguished-looking, with silver hair, sharp blue eyes behind expensive glasses, and the confident bearing of someone who had spent his entire life being respected and obeyed. He wore a tailored suit and a tie with a subtle pattern. Everything about him screamed success and authority. His smile was polite but cool when he saw them. "Can I help you?" Sarah showed her badge. "Dr. Brennan, I'm Detective Sarah Martinez, and this is Assistant State Attorney Jennifer Kim." Would like to ask you some questions about your former practice. Brennan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. Caution. What is this regarding? Allegations that have been made concerning unauthorized procedures performed at Brennan Women's Health Clinic between 2004 and 2011. Brennan was silent for a moment, then stepped back from the door. I suppose you'd better come in. His office was impressive. Large, with windows overlooking a landscaped courtyard. The walls were covered with framed diplomas, certifications, and awards. There were photos of Brennan with various dignitaries, giving lectures, receiving honors. Bookshelves lined with medical texts and research journals. A large desk with a leather chair. Everything designed to intimidate. To remind visitors that they were in the presence of someone important. Brennan sat behind his desk, folding his hands calmly. I performed thousands of procedures over my career. I saved lives. I helped women in crisis. If someone is making allegations, I can assure you they are mistaken or misrepresenting events from years ago. His voice was smooth, confident. The voice of someone who had spent his career being believed without question. Sarah sat across from him, her notebook open. We have testimony from multiple patients who say you performed hysterectomies without their consent. Brennan's expression remained calm, but his eyes hardened slightly. Medical procedures sometimes involve complications that require emergency interventions. I always acted in my patient's best interests. If a hysterectomy was performed, it was medically necessary, and patients would have been informed. Jennifer leaned forward. We also have testimony from former staff members who say you routinely performed unauthorized procedures and falsified medical records. Brennan's jaw tightened, just slightly. Disgruntled employees with axes to grind. My clinic closed due to financial difficulties, and some staff members were unhappy about losing their jobs. This is clearly a witch hunt based on bitter accusations from people who want to blame me for their own failures. His tone was dismissive, almost bored. But Sarah noticed his hands had tightened on the armrests of his chair. Jennifer pulled out copies of Brennan's research papers and spread them on his desk. Between 2004 and 2010, you published 12 research papers on uterine tissue regeneration. Your research required extensive fresh tissue samples from healthy women of reproductive age. Where did you get this tissue? For the first time, Brennan hesitated. Just for a moment, but Sarah saw it. The first crack in his confident facade. From ethical sources. Donated material. Everything was properly sourced and approved by the Institutional Review Board. Jennifer's voice was sharp. We've contacted every tissue bank and organ procurement organization in the region. None of them have any record of providing you with the volume of tissue your research required. So I'll ask you again, where did the tissue come from? Brennan stood up abruptly, his face flushing. I don't appreciate the implication of this line of questioning. I followed all proper protocols. My research was groundbreaking and helped advance medical science. If you're suggesting I did anything unethical, you're mistaken. Sarah stood as well, her voice calm and steady. Dr. Brennan, we have 23 women who came to your clinic for routine procedures and left without their uteruses. Many of them were never told. Most of them never consented. We have documentation that your medical records were falsified. We have testimony from staff who say you harvested organs for research. This isn't about disgruntled employees or medical complications. This is about a systematic pattern of violating vulnerable women. Brennan's face had gone red now, his composure finally cracking. I think we're done here. You can contact my attorney if you have any further questions. This conversation is over. He moved toward the door, clearly expecting them to leave. But Sarah didn't move. We're not done, Dr. Brennan. We're going to find every woman you hurt. We're going to document every falsified record. We're going to trace every tissue sample. And we're going to hold you accountable for what you did. Brennan's hand was on the door handle, his voice icy. Good luck with that. I've dedicated my life to medicine. I've helped thousands of patients. You're chasing ghosts based on accusations from unreliable sources. No jury will believe your witch hunt over my decades of distinguished service. Jennifer smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. We'll see about that. As they walked back to Sarah's car, neither of them spoke until they were safely away from the building. He's scared. Did you see him when you asked about the tissue sources? Sarah nodded. He's been untouchable for so long, he doesn't know how to handle being questioned. He thinks his reputation will protect him. Jennifer looked back at the research facility, her expression hard. His reputation is about to become his biggest liability. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. Sarah started the car, but before pulling out, she glanced back at the building one more time. Something was nagging at her, something she had seen in Brennan's office. Wait. I need to check something. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photos she had taken of the victim files. She found what she was looking for, a photo of Keisha Williams from 2008. Then she pulled up the photo she had discreetly taken of Brennan's office wall while he was distracted by Jennifer's questions. There, among the many awards and photos, was one from 2009. Dr. Brennan receiving some kind of research excellence award, shaking hands with a university dean. And in the background, slightly out of focus but clearly visible, was a woman in surgical scrubs. Sarah zoomed in on her phone, her heart pounding. It was Keisha Williams. Jennifer, look at this. Jennifer leaned over, squinting at the screen. Her eyes widened. That's one of our victims. She was working at his clinic when he won that award. Sarah's mind was racing. She said she was a patient in 2008. But this photo is from 2009, and she's clearly working there. Why would she come back to work for the doctor who had just performed an unauthorized hysterectomy on her? Unless she didn't know yet. Unless he performed the hysterectomy under the guise of medical necessity, and she trusted him enough to even work for him afterward. It wasn't until years later, when she tried to have the records reviewed, that she realized what had actually happened. Jennifer sat back, her expression dark. He didn't just violate these women. He was so confident in his cover-up that he kept some of them close, having them work for him, trusting him, never suspecting what he'd done. The level of manipulation here is staggering. Sarah started the car again, her jaw set. We need to talk to Keisha again. And we need to find out who else might have worked at that clinic without realizing they were victims too. The pieces were coming together. The pattern was clear. Dr. Richard Brennan had built an entire operation around exploiting vulnerable women, harvesting their organs for research, and covering his tracks so thoroughly that many of his victims didn't even know they had been victimized. But now, finally, the truth was coming to light. And Sarah was determined to make sure every single piece of evidence was documented, every victim was found, and every crime was exposed. Because Dr. Brennan was right about one thing, he had been untouchable for a long time. But that was about to change. If this investigation has shocked you as much as it shocked the detectives working the case, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. What comes next, as they uncover the full scope of Brennan's crimes and the conspiracy that protected him, will leave you absolutely stunned. And here's a question I want you to think about. If you discovered you had been victimized years ago by someone you trusted, someone respected by society, would you have the courage to come forward knowing you'd face skepticism and have to relive your trauma? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The breakthrough that changed everything. Maya Alvarez couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Couldn't focus on anything except the gnawing certainty that there were more women out there, women who, like her, had been violated by Dr. Richard Brennan and didn't even know it yet. Detective Martinez had told her to let the professionals handle it, to focus on taking care of herself, to prepare for what was coming. But how could she? How could she just sit at home knowing that somewhere out there, women were living with the same loss she had, maybe without even understanding what had been stolen from them? So Maya did what any mother, any fighter, any survivor would do. She started looking. It began with a simple Google search at 2 in the morning, her laptop glowing in the darkness of her home office. She typed, Brennan Women's Health Clinic Infertility Problems. The first few pages were just news articles about the clinic's closure, some old reviews, nothing useful. But then, on page 7 of the search results, she found something. A forum post from 2016, buried in a women's health discussion board. The post was titled, Anyone Else Treated at Brennan Clinic in CT? Weird fertility issues after? Maya's heart started pounding as she clicked on it. The original poster had written just a few sentences. I had a routine procedure at this clinic in 2007. Years later, I found out I can't get pregnant and doctors can't explain why. Just wondering if anyone else had similar experiences there. There were 3 replies, all from different women, all saying essentially the same thing. Me too. I was there in 2005. Same here, 2009. I thought I was the only one. Maya's hands were shaking as she created an account on the forum. She typed out her own story, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She explained what had happened to her, what Dr. Brennan had done, what Detective Martinez was investigating. She asked if anyone else wanted to come forward, if anyone else had questions about procedures they'd had at that clinic. She hit post and sat back, her heart racing, not knowing if anyone would respond, not knowing if this late-night search would lead anywhere. Within 3 hours, she had 12 private messages. Within a day, she had 43. Women from across Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, even as far as Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Women who had visited Brennan's clinic for routine procedures, abortions, consultations, minor surgeries, and later discovered unexplained fertility issues. Women who had been told they had uterine abnormalities that made pregnancy impossible. Women who had been referred for surrogacy without clear explanations why. Women who had spent years and thousands of dollars on fertility treatments that never worked, never understanding that the real reason was because essential parts of their reproductive system were simply gone. Maya documented everything. She created a spreadsheet with names, dates, procedures, outcomes. She cross-referenced stories, looking for patterns, looking for connections. She spent 16, 18, 20 hours a day at her computer, reaching out to women, listening to their stories, adding them to her growing database. James found her at 3 a.m. one night, surrounded by printouts and sticky notes, her eyes red from crying and staring at screens. "Maya, you need to sleep. You need to eat something. You're destroying yourself." But Maya couldn't stop. Every new woman who came forward felt like vindication. Proof that she wasn't crazy, that this was real, that Dr. Brennan's crimes were even more extensive than anyone had imagined. It was through this online community that Maya found victim number 24. And this victim would change everything. Amanda Peterson had been lurking in the forum for days, reading every post, every story, wrestling with a decision that had been weighing on her for 10 years. She had known. Not everything, but enough. Enough to feel complicit. Enough to carry crushing guilt every single day since. When Amanda finally sent Maya a private message, it was 2 paragraphs that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. "My name is Amanda Peterson. I worked as a medical records clerk at Brennan Women's Health Clinic from 2006 to 2011. I knew Dr. Brennan was doing something wrong. I saw him altering patient files, forging consent forms, documenting procedures that didn't match what the original records showed. I tried to report it once, and he threatened to destroy my career, to accuse me of being the one falsifying records. I was 24 years old and terrified. So I kept my mouth shut. But I made copies. Before the clinic closed and they destroyed everything, I made backup copies of the original patient files. I've kept them all these years, not knowing what to do with them, too scared to come forward. If you're really trying to stop him, if there's really a chance to hold him accountable, I'll give you everything I have." Maya's hands were shaking so badly she could barely type her response. She immediately forwarded the message to Detective Martinez, then called her, even though it was 4 a.m. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the hour. She was used to calls at odd times. "Maya? What's wrong?" "I found something. Someone. A woman who worked at the clinic. She has the original records. The ones from before Brennan altered them. Sarah, this could be the proof we need." There was a pause, and Maya could almost hear Sarah sitting up in bed, reaching for her notepad. "Tell me everything." 3 days later, Sarah and Jennifer sat across from Amanda Peterson in a secure interview room at the police station. Amanda was 39 years old now, but she looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. This was the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying an unbearable secret for far too long. She had brought 2 cardboard boxes with her, packed carefully with file folders, each one labeled with a patient name and date. 10 years of guilt, preserved in manila folders and photocopied documents. Amanda's voice was quiet but steady as she explained. "I started working at the clinic in 2006, right out of community college. I was excited, it was my first real job in healthcare administration. At first, everything seemed normal. Dr. Brennan was respected, the clinic seemed professional, the staff was friendly." She paused, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "But after about 6 months, I started noticing inconsistencies. Dr. Brennan would ask me to update patient files days or even weeks after procedures. He'd say things like, 'I forgot to note some additional findings,' or 'we need to clarify the consent documentation.' At first, I thought it was just routine administrative cleanup." Sarah leaned forward. "When did you realize it was more than that?" Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "There was a patient in early 2007. I'll never forget her name, Jasmine Rodriguez. She was 22, came in for an abortion. Standard first trimester procedure. I processed her consent forms, everything was straightforward. But 3 weeks later, Dr. Brennan called me into his office and handed me her file. He said there had been complications during the surgery, that he'd had to perform additional procedures, and that the consent forms needed to be updated to reflect that. She opened one of the boxes and pulled out 2 file folders. I had already made my own copy of her original file, not because I suspected anything yet, but because I was still learning the systems and wanted to keep examples of properly completed paperwork for reference. So I had her original consent form. Amanda spread 2 documents on the table. Sarah and Jennifer leaned in to look. The first document was a standard abortion consent form. The patient acknowledged understanding the procedure, the risks, the alternatives. At the bottom, a signature, Jasmine Rodriguez, in clean, flowing handwriting. The second document looked similar at first glance, but the wording was different. This one included language about comprehensive reproductive surgery and possible hysterectomy if medically necessary. The signature at the bottom supposedly said Jasmine Rodriguez, but it was clearly different, shakier, less confident, obviously written by a different hand. Jennifer picked up both documents, holding them up to the light, examining them closely. These signatures aren't even close. This is clear forgery. Amanda nodded, more tears spilling down her cheeks. That was the first time I knew for sure something was wrong. I confronted Dr. Brennan about it, not aggressively, I was too scared for that, but I asked him why the consent forms were different. He got very calm, very cold. He told me that in medicine, documentation sometimes needs to be updated to reflect the full scope of treatment. He said that patients often don't fully understand or remember what they consented to, and that it was part of my job to maintain accurate records. He made it sound like I was the one who didn't understand how things worked. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. What happened next? I tried to talk to the practice manager, thinking maybe she could help me understand if this was normal. She shut me down immediately. Told me to do my job and not ask questions. When I persisted, Dr. Brennan called me into his office again. This time, he wasn't calm. He told me that if I continued to cause problems, he would tell the licensing board that I had been the one falsifying records. He had connections, resources, a spotless reputation. I was just a clerk with no proof and no credibility. Who would they believe? Amanda looked directly at Sarah and Jennifer, her voice breaking. I was 24 years old. I had student loans. I needed the job. I was terrified. So I did what he wanted. I updated the files. I kept my mouth shut. And I hated myself for it every single day. She gestured to the boxes. But I kept making copies. Every file that didn't look right, every consent form that seemed altered, every patient who I suspected might have been, I made backups. I told myself that someday, somehow, I would find a way to make it right. When the clinic closed in 2011 and they started destroying records, I managed to save these. I've kept them in my storage unit for 10 years, not knowing what to do with them, too scared to come forward because of his threats. But when I saw the news, when I saw that other women were finally speaking up, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Jennifer was already going through the files, her expression growing darker with each folder she opened. Amanda, how many files are we talking about? Amanda's voice was barely a whisper. 73. 73 women whose consent forms were altered after their procedures. 73 women who I believe had unauthorized surgeries. The room went silent. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. They had identified 23 victims through their investigation. Maya had found another 20 or so through her online outreach. But 73? The scope of Brennan's crimes was even more extensive than they had imagined.